a cinematographer, and in cinematography departments worldwide, usually the numbers against men and women are the worst. So there has been, for example, if I'm not mistaken, in UK, there used to be 1% of female cinematographers, and now there is a big pushback because everybody's saying, oh, there's too many, and it's now 4%. So after years and years and years of work. So I come from the trenches, in a sense, and also I'm a member of the Board of IMAGO, which is International Federation of Cinematographers, and in the board we have a workforce for diversity and inclusion. And in this context we have been organizing in Camera Image Festival now for 4 years a panel discussion about diversity and inclusion. So I have gotten some first-hand feedback from these events also. I tried to go through a presentation that I actually did some years ago, but the situation in Estonia hasn't really changed that much. So we tried to get a little overview of the gender balance in Estonian film industry. And for this, I jointly with Estonian Film Institute, we did a small survey. In a way, I was reluctant originally to talk about this topic because what I can say is that all female cinematographers, as far as I know, would prefer to be called cinematographers, not female cinematographers. So usually, there is a very strong feeling that this is a topic we don't want to actually talk about, because it feels like some kind of add-on which we as cinematographers really don't sense to be so important part of us. Gender is just one thing of being a personality. I personally changed my opinion when I was when I received accidentally, it wasn't supposed to reach me, but an email where one of my ex-students wrote to somebody that here in Estonia, in cinematography, we don't have anyone to look up to. Only Elen is the only female cinematographer here in Estonia. And then I understood that there is a responsibility to actually talk about this issue, because next generations need to see that there is this saying, if you can see it, you can be it. So part of my work has been to show that there are actually female cinematographers existing and to change the unconscious bias, because usually when people think about cinematographer, they imagine a middle-aged white man. So a part of changing the view is also changing the unconscious bias. But let's look at these numbers a little bit. So we did this survey where we combined the statistics of Estonian Film Institute support for films and then statistics of Baltic Film and Media School admission, because school is part of the solution, the problem. And we did a questionnaire within Estonian female filmmakers. So, and you can see here, I will run quite quickly through them because it's from 2012 to 2016, and I will give a little bit of overview of what is the most disbalanced job. One thing in film you always need to remember is that the gender unbalance is departmental problem. So if you look overall on the film industry, then very often production, makeup and costume balances out the unbalance in technical departments. So actually if you want to know the real numbers, you have to look inside the departments, and then you see that cinematography, lighting, grip, these departments are extremely, the numbers are extremely bad towards women. So here you can see, for example, cinematographers is very, very unbalanced. And that year also in Estonia, directors. Estonia is very small, so you have to remember there are usually 5 to 6 people behind these numbers. The thing is that very often when we speak about a certain problem, we say that first let's look at the numbers, and then we see how big the problem really is. And this is what I have experienced, that when you really show how bad the numbers are, actually people start changing their opinions and their biases. But sometimes these numbers are also tricky. Just as an example, let's look at the cinematographer column here. So you can see that 2012, 16% of Estonian cinematographers were female. And then 2013, 0, 14, 0, 15, 0, 16, 11%. So what happened is that I had a child, and that's why the numbers changed, so I didn't work for 2 years on features. So this is why the numbers are a little bit tricky. In a very small country you can get numbers which are, 16%, not so bad. But when you think about how many people actually make feature films and how many feature films we actually make a year, then behind these numbers there is usually 6 to 7 people. So this is why it's always important to look at the overall context. So in smaller countries, sometimes the positive side is that there is less gender bias because the numbers of people are so small, everybody knows each other. So there is more maybe personality bias than gender bias. But when we talk about this issue, we have to look into what is happening in the schools also, because schools are the breeding ground of the future. And these numbers that we see here are very, very similar to what happens all over the world. So one of the things which we experience where women disappear is, firstly, I'm now using an example in cinematography, but it's very similar in other fields also. Nowadays, schools are almost equal. So it's not as bad as it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, where there were no female cinematography students. So there is almost 50-50 in very many schools. And actually, when we look here in the graduation numbers, this looks much more positive towards women because more women graduate. In reality, more women graduate because men start working earlier. They are sucked into the job market, and the women stay around in schools and graduate. So this, in a way, it should be a positive number, but it really isn't. And so here you can see that 1/3 of the admission is women, and you can see that male dropout percentages are much bigger than women. But then what starts happening when we look at the career paths, then about 20% of men go mainly to fiction films, but much less for women. So there are two axes where women disappear. One is time axis. After graduation, usually there is first couple of years there is still more or less the same, and then 5 years, 10 years time, women start disappearing in very, very devastating numbers. So usually it's whether it's the family issues or just not getting a job. So for me personally, I was a very, very bad camera assistant, I have to say. But I tried before I became a cinematographer, because this is the way how you work up into the cinematography. And there were times after my graduation, some years, when actually I did get a phone call sometimes. Very, very rarely I would get a job offer, maybe twice a year or something. And very, very rarely it happened that I actually already had a job, so I had to turn the job down. And what I experienced firsthand was, every time I said, "Oh, sorry, I can't do it, maybe can this guy or that guy or the third guy, my friends, maybe they can do it." Then the producer always said, "Oh, we already asked them." So at some point I started noticing that, oh, I'm the last person they call. So this is one of those things that actually why women disappear is the constant sensation of whether you're, let's say if you represent the majority, then if you're turned down, then you know, I was turned down because I sucked. Sorry. Because I was bad at my job. When you represent the minority, you never know if you were turned down because you were bad at your work or because you were representing a minority. So this is one of the things that affects very many women, who actually, some of them end dropping out from the field or changing the field. They go to work to similar fields, theater, festivals, but they drop from the original path that they had in their studies. And then the second drop is, of course, budgets. So one axis is time after graduation, and the other is budgets. The bigger the budgets go, the less you see women. So it's somehow, and of course, genre. So for some reason, In world scale, you can see a very clear tendency that female cinematographers shoot romantic comedies, and male cinematographers shoot war films, which doesn't really have any reasons to it. And here you can see two columns, which are like balanced in a sad way. So here you can see total number of men who continue in the film or similar industry and total number of women who disappear. So the disappearance, I think, is actually what we have to look into, which is the sad part, because there is talent out there, there are stories to be told, but the reason for different reasons they get discouraged and they disappear. And if we look at it as a society problem, it obviously is, because these people have been educated. In Estonia we have now free higher education, so the taxpayer spent their money on these people and they disappear from the field that they actually chose and studied for 4 years. I didn't originally, of course, you never want to speak about this sad stuff, because the female cinematographers I have met personally in my life and female filmmakers are all powerful creators, and they don't want pity and they don't deserve pity. But I think this needs to be talked about, because when there is a very, very, very big unbalance, then even a small change makes people feel like, whoa, we have really done something, and then people go about and say, this is too much, those women and those gays, they really get, this is too much. But actually, still, if we look at cinematography, it is very, 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 very heavily globally, and also in Estonia, populated by middle-aged white men, like the rest of the film industry, except makeup department. Thank you.